Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Maybe let me go with two devices. One comes out as a check. Okay, so good evening to you once again. Good evening. Okay, so we'll kickstart the section. I had to pause the earlier one because most of you were complaining you cannot hear me. I mean, analysis and interpretation. The next thing is to piece them together to write a story that you can publish. You submit to a journal for publication, or you submit to a conference proceeding for presentation and interaction with peers in the area. In research writing, there are several stages that you go through. However, I'd like to start from the most basic level at your research planning stage. Before you even start your research, you need to understand how you're going to end up writing a paper or writing an output based on your research findings. You don't wait until you finish collecting your data before you are now trying to see how you can structure your work. So once the data are coming in, you are going through those processes that you have laid down to guide you in the implementation of your research work. One of the ways is to decide whether you are going to, let me go, you can see what I'm talking about, whether you are going to work alone as a sole author, or you are going to have different people who are going to collaborate on the work, what collaborative writing, okay, or you are going to work as a sole author, or yes, or just with your lab or your supervisor, for instance. So collaborative writing, it's one of the approaches that in this dispensation is gaining much prominence. The reason is that it's an indicative of teamwork, of you being participative in teamwork, or you being participatory in teamwork, or being able to work with people from different backgrounds and different orientations and different races and geographies, for instance. So you have to decide in advance whether the work you are going to do or the output you're going to produce as a research paper is going to be done collaboratively, or it's going to be done individually just by yourself and your supervisor. Okay, and there are a lot of things you need to look out for collaborators. You need to decide who and who fits the criteria, or who can complement the work that you are trying to do. If you lack certain skills in certain areas, for instance, you are not too good in statistics, for instance, it's good you bring a statistician on board, or somebody have a strong background in mathematical and statistical modeling, okay, or statistical analysis, or somebody who have fair knowledge and also fair experience using statistical tools to break down complex data and to put them in a way that is understandable for you to communicate your findings, okay, after your research work. If you are somebody who's like, maybe your linguistics is not as strong, your language is not as strong, especially your command over the English language is not that up to par, the best way is to look for a native speaker or somebody who have command over the English language and help you to polish that, so that you don't have to spend money on all these things when you start writing your research or your manuscript. I'm saying all this so that we avoid some of the troubles that some of us went through, because nobody told us this one way. How will the authors be expected to share drafts so to meet the author criteria for publication purposes? Okay, it also helps to put it together as a continuum, so that your story doesn't look disjointed, but is coherent and convincing enough to convince any editor to make your work to the next stage of the review process. Okay, so decide in far advance whether you are going to work alone or you are going to work through collaboration or in a team of researchers you are going to work with. Okay, there are a couple of pre-writing activities. One of them is, most of the time we are told to identify potential donors after we have done our first draft. Unfortunately, I have a different school of thought from that. I will advise immediately you will analyze your data and now know the storyline and all that. Please go online and look for potential donor, at least top 5 or top 3 potential donors that can accept your work as a potential outlet for publishing the work. Okay, once you've done that, go through the author guidelines or the instructions to authors section. You've outlined every detail that you need to format and to prepare your manuscript to meet the format of the journal for their editorial review, their text editorial review for the next process to take place. You don't necessarily have to take a course, let me put it that way, research writing. If you have not done anything yet, that shouldn't be a drawback to you. The next pre-writing activity I recommend you do is ensure that you have a detailed outline of your work. When I say a detailed outline, a plan of your research writing project. It's a project, remember. So treat it as a project management task that you are undertaking. So first of all, outline the different sections, the main component of the work, and who is going to do that, and how you're going to fill those vacant sections of the outlines. If you are working in the group or you're working as a team, who is going to take all of the abstract, who is going to take all of the introduction. If you are dividing that into different sections, who is going to take all of what and all that. Ensure that these things piece together as a single storyline that speaks to convince anybody that lay hands on the work. Okay, so ensure that you go with the outline. If you are not good with outline and the ramble style is good for you, it's all good. I wish you all the best, but unfortunately, there's no research writing I've done without an outline. And Whiteside 2014, for instance, also even testified that he's the most cited chemist on the planet. Okay, he stated one time that all writing that he had done, papers, be it papers, reports, proposals, even slides for seminars and for his lectures, he does that from outlines. You used to learn how to use them as well. In fact, he urged us to learn how to use them as well. Why? Because the outlines serve as a guide. It serves as a master reference, okay, to guide you to your destination. Now, the instructions to the authors, like I mentioned, these days is digitally available on the website of every journal. Those days, there used to be a general guideline, like we have the manual guideline, we have the Chicago manual style, the scientific style format, the American Chemical Society guideline. It's through that we derive even the reference guidelines as well, like the APA, the American Psychological Association, and all that. That's through that we derive the reference styles from. But these days, all these things are available digitally on the website of your target journals. So always consult your target journal's website. Okay. These were hypothetical questions are normally asked. Unfortunately, not in a face-to-face, a one-on-one section where I could chip in this to make the conversation interactive. Yes. Some of you, English might not be your native language or your first language. So naturally, you may face a difficulty in piecing sentences together that could make sense. One of the ways is to, like I mentioned, engage in collaborative writing, where you can engage somebody who is an expert or who is a native speaker of better command over the language than you, and bring them on board to fill in that gap. Okay, they help you to fill in areas that you lack the skill set, okay, to fit in well. And so such people come in to help you. Or you can contract the services of a professional editing services like our firm, Research Desk Consulting Limited. Yes, we are professional research writing, research editing and writing service providers as well. We do have our certifications. We will help you, okay, in putting your manuscript in a better language that communicate your findings without any underwriting or overstating them. You can also take courses. For instance, if you are still a student, you have a number of years ahead of you, then I recommend this for you. Try and take a lot of courses out there. And as we go along, you will get to see them. So these are a number of websites that I've put here that will help you, okay, to improve your writing, your language for research writing. Okay, so there are no shortage of free online courses on scientific writing. And it's not so easy to get personalized feedback on your writing. Yes. However, I recommend the Author Aid, now we call ourselves Rising Scholars, online mentoring scheme. We have the online mentoring scheme. We have also a portal that we run different programs asynchronously. What it means is that you can take these courses at will at your own time, in your own geographical location, and then go through, do the exercises, always in the bid to polish and to hone your skill set in research writing. You have better command over your work. So I can communicate your findings without difficulties. We also have a section for mentors. I happen to be privileged to be one of the mentors on the platform, where you can reach out to senior researchers or senior scientists on the platform whose areas or interests align with your own focus of study, and they can guide you. Unfortunately, most mentors that come to us, sorry to say, most of them don't seem to be serious. So if you are going to join the platform and you want to reach out to us, make sure you are serious so that we don't have to be chasing you. It's your own work. So this was what I was talking about. Make a research plan as your utmost and the first steps you have to take. Okay, so the research plan helps you to identify the research methodology. It helps you to, so your research method helps you to understand the approach that best fit within your limited resources to undertake your research or to generate data that is relevant for your work. It also guides you through the stages of the research, help you to answer the various research questions that you have set for your work. And then it also helps you to mobilize resources that are relevant for your work or that are necessary to undertake your work. There is resources here could be people, your team members, or your lab who will be a good fit, for instance, for your work. And the funding that you need funding, you need some finances, especially to pay for this equipment, to pay for the text, the various analysis that you run, the reagents that you have to buy. When the biological science role like that, you need to pay for some of the extents, especially if the lab do not have dedicated funding. Then you need to seek for external funding for this. The software we use, especially for statistical data analysis, also need to be paid for. And these resources, and these need to be organized under your resources way before you even start your work. You don't start work before you run helter-skelter to be looking for these resources. And then your goal, the research goal, also have to be defined from the outset. You don't wait until you finish before what is this work about? You should be able to know the overall goal of the work. Okay, so define the research goal, and the research goal will help you to seek for funding. And then how do you want to communicate the findings of your work, which is a publication goal? For instance, do you want to publish it in the journal? You want to publish in a professional journal, an academic journal, or you want to publish it as a white paper or as a working paper, or you want to publish as a policy brief, or you want to present it at a conference, okay, where you have further colleague academics or scholars or scientists within the science to interrogate your work or further work that you can do on it. And then you also plan what you call contingencies. Contingencies are unexpected challenges, okay, that you do not expect to have, but you budget for them, you prepare for them, you make up plans and put in mitigation measures. Should there be challenges, for instance, maybe your funding was cut in the midst of the project, what happened to your budget. You shouldn't quit. Okay, so you need to put in one or two contingency measures that could shield you against those unexpected happenings. These are realities. Nobody expected that America will take a bomb one day and go and open it on Iran. That's overnight. And you saw what is happening all over the world. And so that tells you that we need to prepare at every area of our life. We need to have options. We need to be flexible enough to have options. That's where contingencies comes in. To ensure you have contingencies planned as part of your research plan. And next is being smart with your research plan. You just do not come out with your research plan. Your research plan have to be smart. What I mean by being smart is that your research plan have to be specific. Don't come out with generalized research plan, and it is difficult to achieve them because the resources that are at disposal is limited or is being restricted by maybe your funding or even the one who's supplying the resources. And you also have to be measurable because you need to measure the outcome. You're achievable by the end of the day. You need the outcome to speak to. You need the data to speak to. You need the results, okay, to communicate to your founders or to your supporters. And you have to be relevant for the task, and you have to be time bound. You can't do research for the rest of your life. So you should be a timeline for it. And that is what we mean by being smart with your research plan. So remember, your research plan have to be smart. Last but not the least on this, before we delve into the main research structuring, is ethics in research. Unfortunately, most of us take this for granted in research writing. Okay, in research writing, ethics is key. Even though ethics is supposed to be personal before it becomes professional, there are a lot of people that some of us have come across. You see that their level of fidelity to ethics is low. It's not their fault per se, but one thing that could be permissible in my environment, in my geography, in my community, in my society or culture is not permissible in another culture. So you should know that we are coming from different cultures. Once you understand these dynamics, it should tell you that yes, ethics, it's not an option, it's a requirement, a mandatory requirement in the research process. So it needs to be factored in your research plan at the outset, not when you have done your work and you are raising prejudice issues and you are running helter-skelter to resolve them. These need to be factored, okay, in your smart research plan, like we discussed in the previous section. Okay, if your data collection or your data undertaking involves you speaking to or using sensitive research subjects, or yes, research subject, for instance, you're going to work with kids, children, you're going to work with women, for instance, vulnerable groups, or you're going to work with people with disability, we consider these people to be very vulnerable in society. Or you are going to work with animals, especially animals that are almost extinct, for instance. You need to go through what we call ethical approval. An ethical approval, there are institutions in each country or geography. Even if you don't have your university, you have what we call the ethical review board. Okay, that certify that indeed your research is not going to, or in the course of your data collection or implementation of your research, is not going to infringe on the fundamental human right, or is not going to be inimical to the environment or to the species in question that you are researching upon. Okay. Also, it helps the ethical caveat helps to ensure that the data that you are extracting, or the data that you are retrieving or collecting from the environment or from your subject, are not fabricated or are not falsified data. Okay, if you are in doubt about the results of the experiment, especially those of us in the biological science, you repeat or you redesign the work. I had to repeat one of my work like 12 times before I got the right results. Okay, so that is ethics. Somebody who is not ethical will just fabricate, falsify the results. Okay, that cannot happen because in most instances, our research findings is what inform innovations, inform products and service development. Okay, you might not know. So if you go and cook up data or fabricate or falsify data, and the product is based on your data, you misled the entire country or misled the entire world. And so we don't want that to happen in the research field. Okay, and so ensure that you take a personal responsibility for ethics in your research undertaking. And then one of the things I've seen, and especially this is very common in Asia, they do not have room for negative results or negative data. They do not entertain data in their research mind or their research objective that is negative. In other words, data that do not go according to how they expected. They think it's a negative data, so they throw those data away. And I sometimes keep on reminding my boss that in most of the groundbreaking inventions in the world, they came out of negative data or discarded data. And so sometimes we need to take our time to interrogate those negative data. If you have a negative data, why did the data happen that way? Why did we get that data? Interrogate, ask questions. Maybe your reagent combinations, the volume was slightly higher or slightly less. So in that case, when you're advising the patient, advising someone going to use the product, you know that, hey, when you go beyond this threshold, this is going to happen. But if you do not do that and you throw these results away, this might not be available to somebody who is going to chance on your work to guide them in developing their product or their service to help humanity. And last but not the least is communicating your research, which is the subject of our discussion tonight. So in communicating your research, ensure that that communication is grounded in factual accuracy. When I say it's grounded in factual accuracy, it is backed by concrete data, verifiable data, data that can be repeated, okay, replicable data. In other words, when somebody repeats your work using the protocols or the methods you have defined, it should be able to arrive at same or similar data. Okay, so that we have something that we can rely on as a scientific community. Next is writing the research paper or drafting the manuscript. Okay, like I mentioned earlier, drafting the manuscript activity. Most often, we wait until the data collection is over before we start thinking of how we are going to draft the manuscript. My recommendation is that it should be packed. For instance, if I'm undertaking a research, before I go and do the research, I've done extensive literature research or even published what we call scoping study, a review article, or I've done a bibliometric analysis, or I've done the team what has been done, what is being done, and what needs to be done. So it helps me to situate my work within evidence that is already existing, and new evidence that can to enrich the field or to augment the body of knowledge in the field. Okay, so before you undertake any research writing, ensure that yes, your literature review it's solid enough. I mentioned in one of our session that literature review is the bedrock of every research paper or every research work that you do. Okay, so do not wait to complete your research before you start writing. If I collect data today and I think the data is complete, I analyze it and it guides me to even shape the next level of my experiment to make sure I'm collecting data that are really relevant for my work. Okay, research can sometimes feel like never ending. It's true, and I agree with you. Sometimes by the time you even end your work, you feel like there are more work that you need to do. But hey, that's why you need to have a smart research plan, time bound. So assuming you didn't set a time limit for it. Other than none of us can go to school and do a master's and graduate within 2 years or 3 years. None of us can go to school and do a PhD and finish within 4 years or 5 years or 6 years. There should be a timeline for everything. Other than that, research in this service, like a never-ending exercise, and I agree with that. Yes, in some instances, once you are conducting your research and you are not getting the desired result, it is recommended you present a little result that you got as a scientific conference. The reason is that somebody have gone through that, have conducted that work before, but then they might face the same hurdle or challenges we are facing. But because they've been there before, they found a way to navigate through that. And such people could be at a conference, or their student could be at such conferences. And once you raise that issue, you find a simple solution to your issue so that you can make progress with your research work. So conferences are very key. Engaging with the research community is also very key to assess the progress of your work and to move your work forward. So those feedback are very useful to improve your own work. And then as part of your presentation at conferences, it helps you to also find potential collaborators. And beyond you gaining that experience in communicating your research to the scientific community, it also builds your confidence as a researcher to speak, to the scientific community. But that becomes a new, different ball game together when you're speaking to policymakers. Your jargons and your scientific, posturing and everything have to change. So you can speak in a layman language that could be relevant to policymakers, for instance. One of the informal ways you can find different platforms, or you can engage or make your research get to wider audience, is to engage what I do often, what I call opinions, or what I call personal blog. So I have a personal blog, a website. I also have a blog, a professional blog on LinkedIn that almost every week or every month, at least 2 or 3 blogs are shared. And sometimes based on our research, sometimes based on our work in the field. I'm also very present on these different social media, on Facebook, on ResearchGate, LinkedIn, and different on Mendeley, for instance, are also very regular as well. So this helps you to communicate and to engage with the research community. And all these help to shape your work and help you to be abreast with what is happening in your field of study or specialization. Now, writing a research paper, like I mentioned earlier, in 2026 upwards, you do not have to go and pay huge sums of money to get what you call a style manual or the manual guide. Just visit your potential journal. That is why it is recommended that before you start writing, you have identified the top 5 and the top 3 potential journals in your field. Visit their website and go through their author guidelines. And their author guidelines helps you to structure your work. It helps you to know even who qualifies as co-authors on your work. And before you start, you need to understand who are going to be the authors. If you're going to do a number of authors, what is their contribution? And make sure you are making substantial contribution to your work before you add them as authors. Avoid what I'll call gift authors. We'll come to that in the next slide. Or what we call the salami authors. I study in an environment, I think is a norm there. They don't seem to care, but those of us from this part of the we care about it. You have to contribute meaningfully to the work before your name is put on any research paper. And so ensure that whoever is going to be an author, a co-author to the work, really contributed materially and substantially to your work. So that is how you define the authors. And the order in which the author names will appear on your research paper or your manuscript is also very key. This is a convention. Normally, the convention is from the junior author or the lead author, the one who did about 50 to 60 or 70% of the work is the first author, followed by seniority of the authors or the contributions of the authors. Anybody who contributed less will come maybe around the 4th, 5th, 6th, 8th author. Normally the last author is the most senior most among the authors. The most senior most here could be your professor, your supervisor, for instance, who sought for the funding for the course of supervisory work. And avoid plagiarism as much as possible. And you can do this by referencing and citing peer review referencing, credible references correctly within your work. And then writing in your own, what I'll call paraphrasing. So you have to learn the skills of paraphrasing. One of these, I think when we have time, we'll have a whole special session the 2-hour section on paraphrasing, how you can adopt the 4 strategies of paraphrasing to paraphrase things in your own words to avoid plagiarism and avoid bias, especially due to conflict of interest. And one of the ways you can avoid this is be ready to disclose any conflict of interest in your research work. Admit that there are limitations of your work in terms of juxtaposition or generalization of your results or interpretation of your results, for instance. Say that indeed, if your work is like this and interprets it beyond it, there could be a mistake or it could be a misleading generalization. So acknowledge that in your work. Most of the time, you do the acknowledgement in the latter part of your discussion or in the latter part of your materials and methods section, so that any reviewer or any reader who is reading know that, oh, you even know the limitations of your work. You are not overselling your work, okay? Neither are you overselling your work, neither are you underselling, but you are communicating what the data speaks to on your work. So that's what we expect from a scientific piece. And ensure that your methods and experiment that really help you to arrive at a conclusion or the evidence, the statistical, the data that you've generated that you trust. Remember to document them. Most of the time, some of us, when we do the experiment, we get so excited and we forget to document the steps that led us there or the approach we undertook to arrive at those data. Make sure you document them because you need them in the materials section, the method section for your work. And then even if you're going to present your work, if you're a student for you are going to defend, it's going to be one of the main areas of questioning, one of the main areas of interrogation by a panel of judges. And so ensure that these steps are clearly documented and make sure you do not forget them. Master them as much as you can. And remember, these notes also feed into your method section like I mentioned earlier. Now, let's see this. So there's a case study I've put here trying to show you how you can avoid plagiarism by citing correctly within your manuscript, citing the abstract. Okay, so Kamara, for instance, is a researcher who is aware of the importance of including references in her paper. During her research project, she referred to a lot of published papers. However, in many cases, she only read the abstract of these papers because she found what she needed in the abstract themselves. The question is, can she cite these references or these papers based on reading only the abstract? In order not to waste time on, I'm going to answer this question. The straight answer here is no. The reason is that the abstract is just a signpost to the main work. It's just the entrance, the door to the room. What is the content? The content is what is in the bedroom. So you have not gone to the room itself. You cannot stand at the entrance there and say that you know the place or you've seen the person or know where they are hiding. So at all costs, we recommend that ensure you have read the paper, okay, especially the most important part. You've read not only the abstract, you've read not only the introduction, you've read the methodology, you've read the results, you've read the discussions and the conclusion. So that when you piece them together, you understand all the nuances and the caveats that comes with interpretation or the communication of the findings so that you can cite them, whether they align or otherwise with your own work or your own finding. Okay, and then ensure that your citations is better placed within your work. I've given examples here that will help you in your own revision time. Now, in your research writing, one of the, these are some of the ways, in fact, these are the 2 major ways you present your result. You don't present them as tabulated results or as charts or figures. Okay, in the classical textbook research writing, a table or figure, they are used to summarize what's already presented in the text, that is in the book. But in a research paper, no, it's completely different. Every table or every figure contains results, and these results must present something new. You are not just interpreting what is in the book. The interpretation is just a summary of the common trend in either the table of results or the figures or the chart result that are represented in the chart. Okay, so once you've done that, it doesn't have to be repetitive in your work in terms of interpreting these results in your work. Okay, so figures. So in your writing, figure is very key. Figures not come easy. Okay, you can have figures, and these are determined by your data structure. If your data structure is a bit confusing, ensure that there's some uniformity, and then you choose the appropriate statistical test, and that the text to give you the most appropriate graphs, the chart or plots that you can have for these data, and how to represent or communicate this result. You can present them as graph or chart or plot, bar graphs, line graphs, scatter plot, box plot, and several other graphs that you can use to summarize your work. So once you understand your data structure, it will determine the type of graphs, the type of chart or plot that you can use to communicate your findings. Diagrams also very, very important. Diagram most of the time are used for those of us who are in the biological field. If you've done an experiment or conduct an experiment, you need to use diagram to, for instance, to visualize how you laid out your research, okay, how you laid out your experiment. You also use flowchart, for instance, to indicate the steps that you took to undertake your work. And then those of us who also work in the field and the lab, we also take images, especially if you work in images and microscopes. You take photographs, and these photographs are actually information. They are images with dense information, so you need to analyze them at the cellular level to understand. You can also take photographs from the field, GIS maps, especially those who work in the field. You need the maps, okay, to identify or to portray the locations where these studies happen. There are other forms of visual display that you can use in your research work. So these are some of the commonest forms of visualizations you can use to communicate your research findings. Now, the most important thing is the structure of your research article or your manuscript. There are several forms of research articles, structure of research articles. So if you can see here, this is the hourglass. The hourglass have three major parts, the upper part and the lower part. Okay, the lower part look at the container with a cover, with a cork, and the other part look like an index, an inlet cube, sort of. And the below part look as the base, okay, of a conical flask. Now we are going to interrogate this with this diagram here. So that in most field of research, there are standard structure for journal articles. The reason why this is useful is that the standard structure of journal article help us to know where to look for which information, okay, within the research article. You do not necessarily, like we saw in the previous, have to read the entire work to bring the main point from it. Okay? So the structured way of writing it eases writing and also serve as a guide for organizing your article. Last but not the least, it helps us to solicit information from relevant sections. Without it, it's difficult to solicit information from the relevant section of your work. Okay, so let's look at the commonest structures of research paper. Title is constant, the authors, names, and affiliations constant, the keywords is constant, and the abstract is constant. Now, the main part, the introduction, the method, the resource, and discussion is what we call the emirate. So the emirate is an acronym. It's a mnemonic of the major sections: introduction, method, results, and discussions. Okay, so we call it the emirate. So introduction, method, results, and discussion. This is the most popular form of it, and each of these sections answers specific questions within your research writing project. The first one, introduction, answer the question, what was the question? The next section, which is the method, those of us in plants are called the plant materials and method. It answers the question, what did you do, or what did you try to do to answer the question? What did you undertake to answer the question? And the result, what did you find? And then the discussion tells you, how does this mean? What is the implication? What is the meaning of this? Okay, from the various sectors or the various lenses which your objective is trying to elicit new insight and new views. And then we have the acknowledgement and references, and these are constant. Okay, but however, this is not the only form. It is the most commonest form, though. Like I mentioned, we will answer these questions. Okay, the problem or the question itself, the research problem, the research question, and the answers, what you did to arrive at the first one, which will be the methodology, the approach you use, or the tool you deploy to answer the research question. And then when you're answering the question, okay, what did you find, okay, that convince you that there could be a potential answer to the research question. And then once you find this, what do these answers mean and all that? Okay, whether they really answer the questions or that. And that's how you come by with the emerald structure. There are other forms of research structures, like the EDAM, for instance. So the EDAM here, we have the introduction, the results, the discussions, and the methodology. So methodology becomes the last section of the paper. I tend to agree with it. The reason is that the introduction actually sets the pace, okay, for your work. And the next thing, to me, what's one of the most important things, what was the results from this experiment that you undertake? So it gives you a quick insight as to your main findings, okay, of the work. Once the main findings are there, how do you interpret it, juxtaposing it with different literatures and earlier evidences that have been generated on the theme or on the topic? Okay, when you compare. Then now concluded, what were the tools you deployed to arrive at the results that you generated? Then we have the emerald. The emerald is a kind of I personally have a different view. I think it's the most laziest structures of research paper. Because here you are combining not just the introduction, the materials and method, you have a different section for the result. You are combining the results and the discussion section together. And sometimes, if you're not too careful, you tend to miss which one is the discussion and which one is the result section. Most people hide behind the interpretation and then don't do the discussions at all. That's why, to me, professional, I say it's a lazy structure of a research part. Fortunately, we have only few journals who recommend this format. There are other forms. There's a video I've posted here that you can actually watch further insight. Okay, I think we can see it. So that is a quick breakdown of the research writing, the research structure of a typical research paper, and how you can use the various structures to organize your manuscript writing. Now, if you saw in the research structure, we have a title and all that. It doesn't mean they are not included. They are included. The reason is that these are constant. You can't change their positions. But the main component that we mentioned, the introduction, method, results, and discussions, can be interchanged or can be repositioned within the research structure itself. Hence, let's look at the constant, what we call the conserved component. One of them is a research article title, the title of a research article. So your manuscript will always have to have a research article. The research article is actually what sets your story in motion. It's what sets your research story in motion. So it's the first thing that everybody sees, okay, either online or offline when they are reading your research paper. What we advise is that avoid vague or uninteresting titles. The fewer possible words you use that adequately indicate the content of the paper, the better. And that's what we recommend. Do not introduce too much of verbosity. When I say verbosity, too much of wordings and too much of, you understand, complicated terminologies in your title. There's a standard that your research title should not be more than 20 characters. Yes, I think we'll see that in the next slide. And then I normally advise students not to include words like a study of, an observation on. But I've seen a number of, some of my colleagues, respected colleagues, doing this. Unfortunately, I don't know where they got that from, but for my training, you won't see that in any of my published work or even my upcoming works. You won't see a study of an observation on this. No, that's not how I was trained. And so I will recommend, as much as possible, avoid a study of an observation on this and that, unless maybe it's a gray area, it's an area that there has not been any research at all. You are the first of such persons conducting this research on it. In that case, yes, this could be as a case study. And then in modern research, we have what we call running title, what we call short titles. So the running titles are short versions of your paper title, the longer title that you have. And most of the time, it appears at the top of the pages of your research article when it is published. So the title should, one, these are the conditions you need to look out for, or that should guide you in framing and crafting your research article. It should contain not less than 20 words, and it should clearly convey the scope of the research that is reported in your manuscript, and should always include key results from your study. It should be written without, I'm not saying go and quote statistics, okay? But when you are writing with descriptive terms, what would be the common theme from your results, it should feature in your research articles so that it can speak to audience and it can generate interest and attention for your work. It should be written without any abbreviation as much as possible. Avoid acronyms, okay, in your research writing. A phrase like a study of observation of at the beginning, avoid it, like I mentioned earlier. Avoid such in crafting your title of your research. Now, authorship, I mentioned earlier, authorship should be for those who have made intellectual contributions to the work. Like I mentioned, it's always listed for the person who have made the greatest contribution to the one who made the least contribution. And your head of your research group is listed large, or your senior most author on the bill, or your supervisor, or your supervisor or professor will always be the last author. And in certain cultures, they resist it. The professor wants to be the first author. I don't know where that is, but I was trained with a British academic culture. This is the convention we follow, and this is what I'm sharing. So this does not pertain to your jurisdiction. It doesn't mean what I'm saying is wrong. It could be cultural differences or orientation differences. Okay. Now, there's what we call corresponding author. So the corresponding author is the one who communicates with the journal and also with the co-authors, and should be someone who is readily available and reachable during the peer review process. Okay, Some people, when you send them email, it will take 1 year or 2 years for them to respond. A corresponding author should be someone who within 2 or 3 hours can respond to any email that is sent to them. Okay, it's in Asia, especially in China, I'll be very bold to mention this. It is just a prestigious position. You don't joke with this corresponding author position with your supervisor. Other than that, you lose your scholarship or you lose your position in the lab. So don't go and fight with them. And your supervisor, even though might not know anything about your work, and it requires to be the correspondent, don't joke with them. It is their culture, and understand. Okay. But the culture where I was trained, I have been a correspondent author for most of my business. Okay. But in China, no matter how, you cannot be. But let me say that once you correspond, your supervisor will still send all the review comment to you to respond. Okay. I understand it is useful for their promotion, and I don't know how true that is, but that's what I know. Okay. Now, there's what we call your scholarly or academic DNA. In fact, that is your identity, what you call your open researcher and contributor ID, what we call the ORC ID. Okay, this provides a persistent digital identifier that distinguishes you from other researchers globally. Okay, so you may have the same name, but this is your digital researcher DNA. So don't joke with it. It's free. You can go to this website, okay, and create this, and you always have to link it with any submission you do as a researcher. It's free. You do not need to pay for it. So go to the ORCID website, create an account, and then you are good to go. Now, from the title, and we talk about the authors who qualifies to be the author, the corresponding author. Now you have to write the abstract, okay? The abstract briefly summarizes your research, okay? And so it tends to be the most widely read. Why? It is the first to be read, but unfortunately, it's the last to be revised. You can write it as the first to be read, but it's the last, okay, the first to be read, but it's the last to be revised. For instance, I write and do all my things. It is the last thing I write before I submit any manuscript for publication. And it also gives us editors, okay, and peer reviewers the first impression of your manuscript that you submitted for potential publication, the outlet you submitted your work to, and ensure that it is organized in the structure of your manuscript. If your manuscript, the journal you are targeting is recommending or uses or requires an emerald format, okay, your abstract should also be a mini emerald, for instance. If it is emerald, your abstract should be a semi-emerald format. The structure of your manuscript should not be different from the structure of your manuscript. Please take note of this very carefully. A lot of people do this, and because of that, your papers get rejected, and the decks get rejected. Okay, so there's what we also call structured abstract. We'll get there. So the structured abstract is where you caption the different sections or the different components of the abstract. Okay, especially for the BMC groups of journal, they prefer the structured abstract. So if you are submitting to an outlet that requires you to submit a structured abstract, make sure you go by those steps. These are some resources that I've shared that will help you to craft a compelling abstract for your manuscript. So these are the key components, like I mentioned. This is not static, but in most journals, the abstract should be less than 200 words long, and it should contain some information from every part of your research work, including the results, the introduction, the materials and method, and the discussion, conclusion, and recommendations. And remember, the most importantly, your abstract must not contain citations or references whatsoever. Never ever. So it is very, very important. Never include citations or references in your abstract. The keywords is the next. After the abstract, you put keywords. Keywords normally is between 5 to 7, or some journals I've seen them giving up to 10 options. You can add like 10 keywords. So the keywords most of the time is requested by the journalists because of digital evolution. And The keyword should indicate the subject matter of the article. In other words, it should indicate key terms that are used in your field under that topic or theme that your paper is on, and normally appear immediately after the abstract. The uses is that it is used in indexing your manuscript in different academic databases. Secondly, it is also useful in searching in discovering your research when it is published and archived digitally. So if your work is published, and sometimes because of the difficulties and challenges we have in digital internet connectivity, thus the appearance of a key term or word that appears in your manuscript, okay, who can bring your manuscript out when somebody is searching for it and include a tag that is part of your key terms of it. So it is used for discovering your manuscript, for discoverability. And it's also helpful. It is also helpful to use standardized vocabulary in your field. In certain journals, especially those of you who are in the economic field or management economic, most of the journals in this area that I review for, what they have listed standardized vocabulary in your field for these works. If your work fall within any of these themes, they'll ask you to choose through the keywords, which of the keywords can speak accurately to you, and you list them. You don't have to worry your head about it. Okay, and avoid using terms, please, that you already use in your title. In other words, if I've used any words in your research title, don't use it. Don't repeat or duplicate those words as keywords. The reason is that you are reducing the discoverability or the visibility of your work when it is published. Okay, so if your word, for instance, is used in your title, and maybe there's a synonym, a very close synonym that is also popular, use the synonym instead of using the same words in the title. Other than that, you kind of abuse the chance. You underutilize the opportunity to broaden the discoverability of your work when it is published. Okay. Now, let's look at the introduction. I think we should end here. Maybe we'll continue later on. We are introduction, maybe the next time we meet, we can finish. Okay, let's make the introduction. Maybe next week we can do materials and methods, the last bit, because we've done 1 hour already. Writing the introduction, okay? Recall the emerald structure I told you about. The I here stands for introduction. And the introduction section is not always called introduction. In some journals, especially the BMC portfolio of journal, they refer to as background. Okay, background is the same as the introduction. The introduction has 2 main purposes. Okay, one, it provides a background to your research or to your study. It helps readers to understand your study, and it helps researchers to understand the essence of the contribution of your study. Second, it also helps to identify the research question that was addressed by your study. Remember, the research question sometimes is stated as research hypothesis. Now, the length of the introduction differs from journal to journal, or even field and discipline from discipline. So articles in some journals tend to have a longer introduction. The reason, especially those of you who are in the humanities, social sciences, okay, the introduction normally is merged, or it is a subset of the larger literature review. You're supposed to have a dedicated literature review section as part of the introduction for the research. Those of you who are in the social sciences and humanities, you have this. But those of us who are in the biomedical sciences, biological sciences, plant science, no. The literature review is actually subsumed in the introduction. Okay, we do not necessarily have to separate the literature review from the introduction. The introduction encompasses all that. Okay, so articles in the biomedical science tend to have a shorter introduction, like I mentioned earlier, and about articles in your research area. So pay attention to articles in your research area and look at the length of the introduction. And that could also give you a cue as to. So this is the funnel, the funnel shaped hourglass. Like I mentioned, the hourglass I showed, this is the funnel shaped hourglass. So this funnel-shaped hourglass represents the introduction. So the introduction starts from general to specific, not from specific to general. If you have a deductive and inductive, so the introduction is actually inductively logically grounded. Okay, let me put it that way. And so the introduction provide information on the essence of the topic, the relevance of the topic. It highlights relevant previous studies or recent studies that have been done on the work. It also provides answers to questions, research questions. It exposes the glaring gaps in the research knowledge that you are trying to address or bridge. It also provides you with the approach you need to seek answers to these gaps or to fill these gaps. And last but not the least, okay, it also summarizes the main findings or key findings of recent and previous research on this same topic or similar topic, for instance. So yes, sometimes it's good to write it. I normally, what I do, I write an introduction first because I ground it in literature review. Once I've done that, it has given me the scope of the gap that I'm trying to address, and that can inform my subsequent undertaking to find answers like data to respond to the research question that I've said. So this is the order of the introduction. First, the broad background of the introduction will appear first. Okay, there's a mini introduction under the okay for your story. The next is to add a flavor to situate it within literature. Okay, because there are those that have gone before us. In fact, Tesla said we stand on the shoulders. Tesla or Albert Einstein said we stand on the shoulders of those who have gone ahead of us. Of those, yes, of giants who have gone ahead of us. So those who have gone ahead of us, previous work that has been done and recent work that has been done, how do we connect them to our work? And that is where the literature review. So we switch it by referencing relevant recent literature. Remember, it should be recent. At most, should be 10 years or less, 5 years. Okay. Then you situate your work within it. And then you introduce the gap in the knowledge you are trying to address. Okay. The gap here had to do with what are the gray areas, what are the piercing questions, research questions that need to be answered. Okay, so those are the gaps in your research. Later on, when we get to know there are about 5 different types of gaps, research gaps you can identify on research questions. And then what could be the explanation of these gaps? In other words, what is the justification of this research question, of these gray areas, these questions that need to be answered in your topic or on the team? What is their relevance in contributing to advancing knowledge on that team? Okay, so you expose and expound that very succinctly and not too much detail. Okay, and then your exact research hypothesis or research question will be the last one. So this is the way you structure your introduction for a convincing introduction to any publication outlet that cannot ignore. So yes, that is this by the research question. Now let's move to the next section, which is the writing the research method. So the research method here, in most literatures or in most fields, you either see method is the same thing. Those of us who are in the biological sciences like myself, we refer to as materials and method. Others will call research methodology. Others will call it experimental details. It's the same thing. It's a matter of semantics, okay? Different wording and articulations, but the same thing. So essentially, it details an answer to the question, what did you do to find the answers to your research questions or hypothesis? And in most cases, it comes with detailed subheadings that include your research design. It also portrays the tenses you use, whether you're going to use the past tense or the present tense. We'll get to that. Okay. Now, what is the purpose of the method section? Okay. One is to allow others or the research community in your area, or who have interest on your team or in your area of research to replicate your result. When I say replicate, to repeat, can they repeat, follow your method and conduct a similar research in their geography and arrive at same or similar results? Okay, it helps them to test the research methodology and also to further conduct, to do further research on the topic. In most research, we do what we call recommendations. And so once they help replicate, it helps them to also do the further research that we recommended, serve as a gap to be filled or new knowledge to be generated to add to the field. Okay. And two, it allows other researchers to evaluate, assess what you did. And this helps us to determine whether the conclusions that you've made are valid or not, and also determine whether the findings are applicable to the situations under which you've cited that your results should be interpreted against. Okay. So this is a hypothetical questions I ask. Unfortunately, I am not too sure because we are not interacting, because the Zoom call is a YouTube live. You can't speak to me directly. Rather than I will respond to this together. Now, presenting and writing the results section. I was trying to conclude, but I think we can finish it. So the results section, okay, is the R that is in the emerald structure of the research writing. So the outcome or the findings of your undertaking of your research work, okay, falls under the results section. It is the core of your paper. In fact, it is where you generate new knowledge. That is where your originality comes alive. All you've been doing right from title to introduction to methodology, everything had to do with what people have done. You understand? Methodology could be something that has been established and you just added some few things to make it look new, okay, to execute your work. But where you really see you as an author is the result section. That is the originality personified. That is you, your result that you have generated as a result of your undertakings. Okay, and so here you either present your result I mentioned earlier as tables, figures, or both. You summarize the findings rather than providing the data in detail. There are a good number of databases that you can actually archive or deposit. You can deposit the full raw data that can be accessed, what we call data repositories. I have a full blog on this. Maybe it's one of these days we could do a section on it and I can expose you to it. I will be sharing the article maybe within this week on the platform, so both of you on the platform have access to it. And then you present your results. You do not discuss them in the results section. You interpret them. Interpretation here is different from discussion. Interpretation is where you expand briefly on the obvious trend, the common trend within the results, the data set. Briefly, do not try to connect them, compare them, contrast them. That happens under discussion. Some journals actually require you to combine the results and the discussion, which to me I consider to be a lazy approach. Now, this is the structure of the results section. There's no single structure for all results section. So the results section should have a logical structure, like I mentioned. It could also be chronological, and the tenses used. There are two major tenses. There's a flow chart I shared on the platform some few weeks ago on tenses to use in each section of your research work. And so that could come in handy for those who are on the platform. So normally we can report in the past tense and we can report in the present tense. Okay, these are the major tenses we recommend you use in the results section. For instance, I have 3 examples to provide here. Of the 447 children enrolled in the original trial, 302 have completed all 3 extensions of follow-up. So you can see I'm using past tense here. The next, which is the second example, efficacy was consistently lower in the cohort with high exposure to ectoparasites than in the cohort with lower exposure. So here I'm using the past tense. All cases, which is the third one, of severe trypanosomias were resolved with long-term sequel. This is using past participle, which also is allowed. So depending on your result structure, and you determine the tense you use. Sometimes we tend to mix the tense up in writing this section. My advice is to be consistent. If you're using past tense throughout. If you're using the present continuous tense, use the present continuous. If you're using the past participle, some sort of yes, be consistent with it so that there will be logical flow and yes, and flow of your argument. In writing the result section, remember to avoid overlapping. When I say overlapping, no repetition, avoid duplication or rambling, run around. Okay, your text should present only the main point, like I mentioned from the figures and tables, because the figures and tables, their results themselves, they explain themselves. Anybody who's in the field will understand the field, can understand and interpret the results in the table or figures. You do not need to put even a text there, but as a requirement for publication, you're supposed to, highlight the obvious trends there. Include few most important data, especially in your interpretation. Okay, so remember to always cite the figure or the table that you are referring to in your interpretation. Emphasize findings, not the tables or figures when you are citing them. Okay, an example, table 3 shows that researchers who took this course published twice as many papers per year. This is a wrong way to present it. You are putting the attention on the table 3. The attention should be on the table 3. The next one is the most acceptable format. Researchers who took this course published twice as many papers per year. You see, the attention is now focused on the researchers who took the course, not the table. Okay. Last but not the least, discussion. So the discussion is where you fully play with your data. You explain the meaning of your data, expatiate on its relevance, expatiate on its implication, its impacts, how it connects with previous and recent work, whether it contradicted them, why it contradicted them, whether it agrees with them, why it agrees with them, and how that can be useful in advancing knowledge, on the topic or on the theme. Often, it is the last section in the body of your research paper. It explains your results, like I mentioned, of your research. A short conclusion section immediately after the discussion. Sometimes some journals require you to separate the conclusion from the discussion. Other often will also ask you to combine that with the discussion. Okay. Show how the findings. If you are to do that, don't write more than 2 paragraphs with a discussion. Some people can write like 6 paragraphs. It's unnecessary. Okay. Show how the findings relate to previous work. Like I mentioned, you are situating your work within literature. Then you identify the strength and the limitations of the study. This is ethics. This borders on research ethics we noted earlier. Then you address the question whether your findings or your research results has actually responded or answered the questions or the hypothesis that you posted either in your introduction or the materials and method. And then you expound on the implications and applicability of the results to the field. This is how you go about your discussion. So it's one of the most difficult parts to write because you are spoiled for choice of what to say, but there are a lot to talk about. And this follows the structure of the inverted funnel, as we see in the next slide. Often is a brief summary of the main finding, identify a need for further research. Perhaps not all discussion have these purposes. It indicates the purpose that should guide the choice of the content of this discussion. So this is how the structure graphically is illustrated as an inverted funnel. You start the analysis of the result of the study with date-ending implications and suggestions for future future research and practice policy. For instance, should be one of the areas you also recommend if your work is directly related to policy. And then move from specific to general, not like the introduction that move from general to specific. Okay, this one we are speaking to specific results based on the specific data that you generated from your work. and is followed by conclusion sections in most journals. Unfortunately, you might not be able to do this exercise because we are not interacting. So yes, I will leave here. So the limitation borders on ethics. So ensure that you highlight and acknowledge that in your discussions as part of your work. Okay. And then further point you can also highlight in your discussion is the relationship of your findings to recent work or past work that has been done, similarities to previous works. Okay, it could be your own work, others, or both. The difference, okay, if there are differences, the contrast, the differences in your findings from previous findings, highlight that, justify or explain one that happened. And reason for this similarity and difference, like I mentioned. Okay, and also highlight the applicability and the implications of this research. Potential uses which happen could be those of us who are in agri, could be in agriculture, natural resource management, education, policy, industry, and then the relationship of the findings to theories and models. Those of you whose work is grounded in conceptual or theoretical frameworks, ensure that these actually close that gap, okay, so that you have a coherent story tidy up, binding together. You are answering, if you open the door, you need to close the door back. So you have a one coherent story, okay, congealing together. So now acknowledgement. So these are the main sections of the research report discussed. The acknowledgement here in some journal, I don't think is optional now. In some journal, they don't really require, but it's hypothetical. I think it's compulsory, it's obligatory. So it helps you to acknowledge and to appreciate all those who have contributed in undertaking the research work. It could be the technicians that help you to operate some scientific equipment in your lab. It could be a colleague who helped you review your manuscript. It could be a colleague who gave you useful comments. It could be a language editor that made ensure that your work is structured and is flowed fluidly. Okay, it's flowing fluently. Okay, and it could be financiers, funders. Okay, who finance your work, for instance. It could also be grants, be a government agency that funded your acknowledge them, doesn't take anything. And lastly, but not the least, the referencing and reference list. There are two forms of the reference, what we call the inter-citation and the bibliography. The inter-citation and the references that you cite within your text. So the general guideline always provide a style of references that they accept, okay, as part of their requirement. So that is why I mentioned and emphasized earlier that you always have to review the author guidelines to understand the key requirement of the journal. Once you understand the key requirement of the journal, you will see last but one bit in most instances, in most author guidelines on journal website, you have the referencing and reference style. On the reference style, you can use any of these two. We did mainly last month. I think this month, if we have time, we'll do Zotero as well, so that you can have different tools that you can use to automate your referencing and citations. It helps for us to give credit to earlier researchers who have done the work. It also shows how your work is related to other works. And the reference also helps us to find further information. It also helps us to avoid plagiarism. And as somebody who is an advocate for ethical science, yes, it helps to promote credibility and ethics in research writing. And so, yes, so like I mean, these are a number of tools you can use. Mainly, by now, if you do not know, we have a video already archived on our channel. Please go back and watch and learn how to face any difficulty. You can reach out to us and we'll help you out. There's Zotero, so that will be our next reference management training. And then maybe after we'll do EndNote as well. Okay. Yes, I mentioned all these. Yeah, so I think this is the end for drafting your manuscript for publications. So once the draft is done, we've defined all these already. Your target journal has been identified. You've drafted your manuscript. Have somebody read through it for you. It could be your supervisor, or it could be your senior colleague on the field. We have provided a few criteria here to targeting journals that you can do. I also provided journal finder tools. I even made a flyer, okay, an infograph, okay, listing potential, the commonly used journal finder tools that you can use to search for journals. At this stage, you are all early career researchers. I wouldn't recommend you get yourself so fixated with impact factors. Yes, impact factor is good, but impact factor is not the sole criteria you should look out for in selecting your target journal. Beware of what we call the predatory publishers or predatory journals. These are 419 are fake journals with fake metrics that will deceive you to waste your work and your brain. So be careful with it. So you should also understand how your work is going to affect policy or even advanced knowledge in the field. And if your work is more suitable for a regional journal that does not have impact factor, it's okay. After all, if you're not an academic, you don't need an impact factor. It's the academics who bother too much about impact factor for their promotions and all that. Okay. If you're an academic, you shouldn't bother about impact factor. I'm not saying impact factor is not important, but it is not the sole criterion, okay, for assessing academic impact. So before you submit, think about your readership. And these are some of the points. Who are the likely readers of your research paper? What kind of journals they read? How do you want your work to influence or to impact them? And in some field of research, the audience may be global. For instance, if you're writing for global audience, you should have that at the back of your mind. And some research projects are strongly connected to local or regional context, like I mentioned. Your work is more relevant to the regional economy or the regional policy dynamics. It's better is target a regional journal than target the global journal. Okay. So like I mentioned, this is what the journal guidelines, the author guideline entails. So visit the journal website for this information. I'd like to end here. If you have questions, those of you who are on our WhatsApp platform, you can answer. Yeah, you can reach out. You can ask those questions there. I will respond to them. So thank you very much for joining us for this short masterclass. Unfortunately, let me stop the sharing and questions here. So if you are here and you have questions, please ask them in the WhatsApp group, and then we can respond to them. Thank you. Ciao. All right. See you guys.